Well, I like to tell you that my story is unique in that way, but it isn't because the reality is that child abuse, childhood stress, childhood trauma has a very strong connection to developing an addiction, which, as you noted today, we call a substance use disorder, but that has a very strong connection to developing an addiction. If you see a teenager who has a severe drug problem, most almost every time there's going to be a trauma history and or untreated mental health condition.
Welcome to Out of the Box with Christine, the podcast for conscious entrepreneurs. Are you willing to step into your greatness? Are you ready to shine? Well, get ready, Truth Seeker. You're in for an amazing ride. And now, here's the host of the show, Christine Blosdale.
Welcome back to Out of the Box with Christine. I am your host, Christine Blosdale. I am a media coach for entrepreneurs who are socially conscious, who want to improve their lives at the same time as improving their business. And today, you're in for a treat. I've been really looking forward to this program, and I feel that it's very important. So, welcome aboard. My guest today is Mary Beth O'Connor, and she is the award-winning author of the book From Junkie to Judge: One Woman's Triumph Over Trauma and Addiction. And for Mary Beth, childhood abuse and other traumas led to substance use disorder, which is an addiction. Beginning with alcohol at age 12, she spent several years abusing various drugs, and she found methamphetamine at 16 and started shooting up at 17. Mary Beth struggled with meth until she was 32 years old. By incorporating ideas from multiple sources to build a secular, not a 12-step program, but a secular recovery plan that worked for her, Mary Beth has been sober since 1994. In addition to that, professionally, 6 years into recovery, Mary Beth attended Berkeley Law, where she then worked for a large law firm in Silicon Valley, then litigated class actions for the federal government in 2014, and Mary Beth was then appointed a federal administrative law judge, a position from which she retired in 2020. What a journey, Mary Beth. My goodness. Well, let's start where you would like to start with this. A little bit about your story and at such a young age to find drugs and I'm sure alcohol and the whole thing.
Well, I like to tell you that my story is unique in that way, but it isn't because the reality is that child abuse, childhood stress, childhood trauma has a very strong connection to developing an addiction, which, as you noted today, we call a substance use disorder, but that has a very strong connection to developing an addiction. If you see a teenager who has a severe drug problem, most almost every time there's going to be a trauma history and or untreated mental health conditions. And that's just, that's the reality. And that's what it was for me. I not only had the trauma, a lot of physical abuse, even sexual abuse, really no parent that was bonded or paying attention to me. But on top of that, as a result, I didn't know it, but I had PTSD and I had, severe anxiety and depression at times. And so it was all of that together that made drugs very appealing because in the beginning, they seem to help. And
Yeah.
that's why you keep pursuing it, right? In the long run, they can be a problem, but in the beginning, they seem to help. They are a pain management tool. They are a number. They are a stress reliever. And that's what I noticed. And that's why I pursued it.
Well, and we're talking about a pain, a trauma so deep, and especially at a very young age, not understanding what's happening, not understanding what is occurring, but knowing deep down that something is not right, and then looking for the people that are supposed to actually protect you and support you and love you, looking for that and not finding it. And I could see how someone could, at a certain age, look for that comfort in something else either other people or substances to help numb that pain, which would be that numbing effect, I think would be probably much better than facing the actual pain of the trauma.
Yeah, because you're not given any real tools to handle it, right? And I will say it is the numbing and the pain meds, but it's also happy. Using meth for the first time was a massive dopamine rush, right? I mean, there is a joyful, happy, fun part to it in the beginning. You're with your friends and you're staying up all night and you're talking and you're chatting and your energy is high and you feel good because of all the chemicals that are being pushed through your system. And so I remember feeling even with the alcohol that first time when I was 12, I just felt like I was sort of landing with my girlfriend in a more truly joyful way that I didn't remember experiencing. And so it's both sides of that. If you feel good and it helps distance you from your painful feelings.
I just have a question because I've spoken to quite a few people who had suffered childhood trauma and abuse, and everybody deals with it differently, right? But I have spoken to a few people who actually were able to confront their abuser, and it did help them in many ways. Were you ever able to do that, or was it something that was swept under the rug in the the dysfunction of families? What were you able to ever have that closure?
So when I got sober, I started doing mental health treatment. Like, today it's really emphasized that when you're starting to recover from your addiction, if you have other mental health conditions, and I will say substance use disorder is a mental health condition, but if you have others, it's you recommended to deal with them both from the beginning. And so I was in therapy with a trauma specialist for a number of years. By the time I left for college, my mother actually left my stepfather, who was the most violent and, the sexual abuser. And I didn't have any relationship with him after that. I mean, I wouldn't talk to him. I wasn't interested in resolving something. He was gone. Gone was good.
Right,
But I did have to have an ongoing relationship with my mother. And so that was really tricky at times. And it took a lot of work and a lot of practice to be able to get to a relationship with her, which was sort of in which I didn't feel emotionally triggered. At
it,
first,
yeah,
her behavior would trigger me to behave in the same poor way, yelling and, being dismissive and being verbally aggressive. And as I got sober, I started to see that behavior and realized like I don't want to act like that, right? And I can't
right,
change her. She really wasn't going to change. And my relationship with my mother wasn't challenging post recovery because of what she did in childhood. It was because she kept doing it, and
right,
even
right.
as I was an adult. And so I had to figure out a way to emotionally disconnect from her so that I wasn't triggered, I wasn't behaving badly. And that took a lot of practice and a lot of years. But eventually, I was really able to got to the point that no matter what she said, I actually didn't care. Like I didn't have an emotional reaction. And to me, that was the best case scenario possible given who she was. And that was how I handled it.
Wow. And question, what with the stepfather that was physically abusive and sexually abusive and all of that, was he also abusive to your mom?
He was very physically abusive to my
Oh,
mother. And
right,
I really think we underappreciate the trauma of witnessing one parent beat another parent, right? Even if he had never attacked me, that is a very traumatic experience. But it also taught me that, so for example, the police came to our house a couple times. A couple times the neighbors called the police because it was so bad.
right.
Oh, most of the time they did nothing to him. They told him to go away and cool off, or they took him in separate corners. Once, when he almost killed her, they arrested him, but that was really late. And so I also got the message that the authorities aren't going to be there to help you, right? I see that they're not helping my mother, so that taught me that they're not going to help me either, and that's part of the not reaching out for help dynamic that can happen.
And that's extremely traumatizing because then there's nowhere to go.
Right. And not only that, you know too that if you try and it doesn't succeed, now you're living with him and he's even more mad, right? And so
Yeah.
there's a risk to disclosure. And if you don't believe that the disclosure is going to have any positive result, why would you take that chance? And so that's part of what can happen within the family units.
There is such an epidemic of this. You know, it's gone on for generations and generations. We know about it a little bit more now because of social media too, and people being brave enough to tell their story. But my goodness, what is going what is going on with human beings that they feel the need to take out their odd fantasies, but also their rage. Because I think there's this internal rage, and I know that there's women that abuse the children as well, their children as well, but it's a predominantly, mostly male thing. But what have you even explored what that is? That deep seated, I don't know, dysfunction that has gone on for so many generations.
I mean, sometimes it is that the abuser was abused, right? I mean, that can
Right.
be part of the pattern. And so that's why in regard to this question, but also when people ask me what's the number one thing we can do to reduce the addiction rate in America, and America has one of the highest addiction rates in the world.
Right.
And for both of those, I would say mental health treatment for children would reduce the rate of them later becoming an abuser themselves and with the rate of them developing an addiction later. And so I think the early intervention in childhood would be where we would focus, but we do not have a robust mental health treatment for, especially if you don't have insurance. But even if you do, it can be difficult to get, proper help. But also, if the child's living with their abusers are not motivated to get them the help they need. That kind of intervention is going to have to come from outside. And although it's better today, I think, there's more understanding, like say with the police, that domestic violence is a crime, that's actual assault and those kind of things. It's still not where it needs to be. And schools, I think, sometimes hesitate, but also a lot of schools, they don't have access. A lot of schools have budget issues and they don't have an
Correct.
in-house therapist or other things, right? But if we were to do one thing to reduce both the generational abuse patterns and the addiction rates, I think it would be, robust mental health treatment for children.
And also having the services that are available for children, making sure that they actually do help children, they don't harm them further. 'Cause that's the other thing. I've heard horror stories about, child protective services and, foster kids and just getting keep continually being abused, which, is a again, hoping that they'd be saved from a situation and then jumping from the frying pan into the fire, so to speak. Uh,
Right. I mean, yes, yes, that definitely is a risk with like child protective services. But I will say one thing that's going on in the substance use disorder community is that women are having their children taken away when they test positive for any drug at the time of childbirth, and this is happening even when the drug is prescribed by their doctor and they were told to keep taking it. So, for example, there's a medication that for opioid use disorder. It's methadone and buprenorphine, and that medication is prescribed by one doctor or another, depending on the drug. Women, if they test positive for they're both a type of opioid, but they're more long lasting opioids. You don't get the same high that you get, I mean, but those drugs reduce the risk of overdose death by about 50%, and they reduce cravings, and they keep people feeling stable enough to really participate in their recovery, which, it increases the odds of successful recovery. But women are getting their kids taken away just because they test positive. And even sometimes for cannabis, even though using cannabis and being an unfit mother are not,
no.
synonyms.
Yeah. No.
They're not synonyms. And there could be no other reason. So there's a lot of this happening around the country today, in part due to an overreaction to what's going on with fentanyl. Not that we shouldn't be concerned about fentanyl, but we need the right response and not responses that are tearing apart families. Because the data shows that children that are taken away from their mother at the time of birth, they have problems going on. They have a higher risk of a lot of different mental health conditions, inability to comfort themselves, emotionally regulate, all of those things.
Oh, absolutely. And then also because then they're open to abuse from other people who are not their mother, right? Who
That's
are not
true.
the
That's true.
yeah.
That's true.
Oh my goodness. So let's go down a little bit of the path here. So at the age of 12 is when you started experimenting with alcohol and drugs. Um and you were talking about earlier that this was a relief, right? And there was happy moments. When I mean if you can remember this, well, probably. But when did it go from that happy hanging out with my friends, this is cool, to, oh, this is not so cool. What situations were you finding yourself in that you knew there was a there was something wrong?
Well, I will say that the people who first became concerned wasn't me, and it wasn't my parents. It was my drug using friends who
When
would keep.
really, Mary Beth, when your
Yes.
drug using friends are concerned for your welfare, then that's a flag. Yes.
That's the flag. But, I was being told pretty early on, that I was using too much. I was using too heavily, but definitely when I started using methamphetamine, and especially when I started shooting it, even other people in my meth shooting community were giving me messages that my use was out of control and problematic. Like, I would lie sometimes about like what when I had last taken a break. Oh yeah, I slept for 4 days. I feel great, because I wanted access to the drugs, but because I also didn't want to hear it. And so, and on some level, I was aware that things were deteriorating, but there on another level, I didn't care, couldn't always see it. And so, it's interesting. Even when I got sober at 32, I mean, there were some times when I look in the mirror and say, you're poisoning yourself. And there were other times where I would minimize, the damage, and it was something else was the real problem, not my meth use. And so, we go back and forth.
Well, and with society, when you hear someone's a meth addict, there's a visual, right? People in their head, they picture the person, with no teeth and, stammering along the sidewalk or something like that. But, did you find yourself in a situation where your health was so rapidly declining that you were fitting that stereotype?
I mean, part of the reason that I wanted to own up to shooting meth is because of that stereotype in the media. I feel like people who shoot meth are sort of presented as if, they're beyond our understanding, or
Yeah.
as if they're so far gone that there's no hope that they're ever going to get better. So why should we even try to help them? And I really wanted to own up and say, I shot meth for a long time, not 5 minutes, a long time. And yet I recovered, and I'm, a contributing member of society and all of that. So I definitely wanted to own that for those reasons. But by 32, I mean, I was having, problems all along. Like I was getting abscesses, from shooting meth. My health was poor because my immune system was really shot. But by 32, I was really starting to see a lot of the physical ramifications of shooting. And there was one of several factors that caused me to finally go to rehab.
And, that well, as a media professional too, the title of your book, From Junkie to Judge, One Woman's Triumph Over Trauma and Addiction, from junkie to judge is just gold. If I could say this was this, let's see, my award for the best title of a book goes to Mary Beth O'Connor. So because it grabs you, doesn't it? That title, it absolutely grabs you.
Yeah, I mean, so today, we try not to use stigmatizing words, and so I would never use junkie when talking about someone else. But like you said, the reason I chose to use it anyway was because I felt like in a couple words it captures that whole arc. And part of what I wanted to say is you can go from shooting meth, to being a healthy, working, productive member of society. I wanted to share that in just those couple words that arc was possible. And I will say, the judge part of my story is the unusual part, right? But it's also not the most important part of my recovery. It's a job that has sort of positive social resonance that I think contrasts with where I was.
Well, and and there's quite a bit of study involved.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
There's quite a bit of follow through and commitment and, responsibility and all of those things. But it's just I love that, claiming that word junkie, and it just in those 3 words or 4 words, from junkie to judge, it just says so much and so much about your journey, as well. And so how did you get interested in law? Was this just something, well, I was little Mary Beth going, I want to be an attorney and then I want to be a judge?
Well, I will say, so I grew up in a very blue collar background. Like my stepfather worked at the steel mill. My mother was a secretary. Nobody in my family had really gone to college, but I had always done well in school. Like school was my one really positive experience in my, crazy home life. I had school. But also I was very verbal and I was argumentative. Like I could beat the grown-ups in an argument a lot of times. So I was told repeatedly that I should be a lawyer, and I was a history major as an undergraduate, but part of it was that I did always intend to go to law school. And I actually did go to Berkeley Law right after college, like right when I graduated. But I had started using meth again on a daily basis in January of my senior year of college. I had started using it again daily, and so by the time I got to law school in the fall, I was so strung out, I was in no shape to do it. And so I tried for a while, but I gave back a top 10 law school because of my addiction. And that
Love
was
it.
just like an agonizing loss. And so, yeah, I never planned on being a judge. That wasn't on my radar, but I had initially planned to go to law school. So when I did go at 6 years sober, it was 16 years from when I went the first time. Well, and I say I went the first time. I was enrolled. I didn't go very much the first time, but I was enrolled. But it was a 16-year gap.
So you went back, and how old were you when you had gone back to college?
But I had my college degree. I had my Berkeley degree already, but I went to law school for
Or
real
from, yeah.
39 when I was 39 and I graduated
Wow.
at 42. So it was a big shift. Yeah.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Okay, I see either a Lifetime movie or a Netflix series based on your life. So if there's any producers out there, they want a really great story, contact Mary Beth. I don't know who's going to play you. Who should play you?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's
Glenn
so
Close?
well, except for a lot of the stories when I was younger, right? And so
We have to find a younger. Okay, we'll work on that. Okay, all right. And so you're so right. So you've retired. Are you a retired judge right now?
Yes, I took, and I always said early retirement in 2020. And so now I retired, although my husband says I need to look that up in the dictionary because I don't understand what it means. So I am busy. I'm on the board for Lifeline Secular Recovery. I'm on the board for She Recovers Foundation, which isn't just substance recovery, but it's also mental health recovery, trauma recovery, everything else too. I'm on the advisory council for the Higher Calling Foundation. I have my book out. It came out almost 2 years ago now. And I've had like opinion pieces in the Wall Street Journal and the LA Times. All those are on my website, by the way, junkietojudge.com. But also, I do a lot of speaking. So I actually created a training for lawyers and judges about substance use and,
Oh,
recovery.
great.
They have continuing legal ed requirements. I created a training. In fact, I'm doing it on Friday again. And I have several workshops that I do for different conferences or different audiences. And then I do like keynotes at fundraisers for organizations I support and things and I do some television, radio, and podcasts. So it's
You are not retired.
yeah. Well, I will say it is. I know it is still like in that part-time box, although it's a challenge because it's hard to turn down, good opportunities. But
Yeah.
I do try hard to keep it part-time. But it's nice to be because I'm retired, I can talk openly in a new way. I can be of
You're
service
right.
in a new way, right? And so
Yeah.
it was really an opportunity for me to think, okay, now that I can say anything, I can say my whole story. I don't have to have, boxes around what I say publicly. How can I use that? Like what's the benefit of that right now? And so I decided to sort of work on creating this role for myself in my retirement.
Oh, that's you know what? I hadn't even thought of that, and that has to be so liberating and so freeing for you. And then you can reach more people that way, who can relate to your story as well. And so right now, with the work that you're doing too, the trainings, this is for attorneys and judges on recovery and on substance abuse. So would this be to also like if for an attorney, if they so for their relationship with their client to understand a bit about the dynamics and the possibility or most likeliness of trauma, of childhood trauma?
I mean, it definitely can be helpful with clients, but lawyers have double the addiction rate for every substance of the general population. And so part of what I go through in the training is I go
Wow.
through reasons why that is. But then I also go through like the ethics rules that can be impacted if they have a drug problem or an alcohol problem. And by the way, whenever I say drugs, I always mean including alcohol. I mean,
Yes.
alcohol is still the number one abused drug, is still actually the number one killer, even over opioids. And so alcohol is definitely problematic as well. But lawyers have a very high substance use disorder rate compared to the general population.
Wow. Yeah, oh, no, and I understand about alcohol. Alcohol has been an issue in my childhood as well, and I think just recently I was talking with my brother. We were recalling a Christmas, 1968 event with the family and how alcohol just turned people into, loving family members into complete I don't even know what they were, but they do call it spirits for a reason, I think, because they're it opens people up to some weird, wacky stuff. Mary Beth, it's just been such a pleasure to be with you, and I'm going to make sure that we have a link to your website, of course, junkie2judge.com. I encourage everybody to go there and to connect with Mary Beth too, if you'd like to, and especially if you are interested in getting her book, I'll put a link in there as well. It's available on all the major Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all those great places. But I'll put a link in the show notes as well for that. And you are welcome back on the show anytime, Mary Beth. I'm just blown away by your courage, by your strength, and your energy. Yeah, to keep just doing this, and really giving people hope that it's not just a sad story and they're not throwaway people. There's actually some hope for people. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, thank you for having me. I've enjoyed the conversation.
Awesome, awesome. And I want to thank you, wonderful listeners who have tuned in through Apple Podcast or Spotify. And for those of you who want to see my wonderful guest, hop on over to YouTube. Out of the Box with Christine is actually on YouTube, and you can see the video of this show, of this episode, and share this. If this is something that's touched you, or you believe that the show can help someone else, maybe someone that's struggling right now, please share it with them. Don't be stingy. Make sure you share this. And like I always say at the end of every show, remember to think outside that damn box. Bye for now.